Hi everyone. I think I see people filing into our live session. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited to bring you this discussion on the impact of AI on PR and explore the transformations that's kind of happening across our industry. I'm Matt Oakley, and I'm your moderator for our webinar today. I'm the SVP of Analytics and AI at Hotwire, and we're a communications consultancy celebrating our 25th year anniversary, working with the most innovative and leading brands across the technology industry. And as you can see in front of you, I'm joined by a stellar panel. So I'm just going to go ahead and introduce your experts for today. So, firstly, we've got Meredith Klein, journalist, media expert, and author of Meredith and the Media, a Substack exploring how journalism and storytelling are evolving. If you don't already subscribe to this, do so immediately. She previously led US consumer and product comms at Pinterest and held senior roles at Walmart, amongst others, and brings a sharp perspective on how brands can stay at the center of the conversation in the AI era. So good to see you again, Meredith.
Thanks for having me.
Um, Next up, we've got Pete Paschal, veteran tech journalist and founder of the Media Copilot, which is a newsletter and podcast about how generative AI is changing the media. He's served as tech editor at outlets including Mashable and CoinDesk, where he's covered how emerging technologies like AI are transforming media and journalism. Pete brings a newsroom perspective on how AI is reshaping storytelling and the role of journalists in the new landscape. So glad you can join us today, Pete.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
And last but certainly not least, Olivia Fajardo, Director of Research at the Institute for Public Relations, where she leads major research studies and oversees IPR's Centers of Excellence and Public Relations Journal. She brings agency experience across healthcare, nonprofit, and hospitality sectors, and holds a master's degree in health communication and behavioral science from the University of Florida. Olivia's work focuses on applying research to the evolving challenges of comms and PR. So pleased that you've joined us, Olivia.
Thank you, Matt. Happy to be here.
So just before we get into it, I'm just going to cover off a couple of pieces of housekeeping. We'll be leaving some time for at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So if you've got any questions for the panel, feel free to submit them using the Q&A module throughout the discussion. We are recording this webinar and we'll be sharing the recording link with attendees and registrants later this week, so you and your teams can catch up with this on demand. And finally, feel free to use the chat and interact with each other throughout the session and engage with kind of what the speakers are saying. I think it's going to be a great discussion, so hope you all enjoy this as we kick it off. So with that, I think we can get started. AI and PR, it kind of feels like every day I see a post on LinkedIn or read a new article about how the change AI is kind of bringing to our industry. I think in the past 10, 15 years, I don't really remember a more transformational kind of technological innovation than AI. And I think the potential impact for our industry is kind of monumental and huge. I think it might even be said that AI, and more specifically, kind of the adoption of AI search and the change that that's bringing, is maybe the most significant driving force in years in increasing the importance and relevance of PR. Kind of with those earned media and trusted sources now shaping what AI answer engines are kind of showing, I think this opens up the opportunity for PR professionals and kind of shapes the way in which we're going to be doing PR over the next few years. So a question to kick us off, and it's going to go to all of you. So Meredith, I'm going to come to you first. In your view, what's the most critical shift happening right now, and what does that mean for the future of PR discipline?
Sure. So I will say probably 2 or 3 years ago, when AI was starting to really fester. I learned from Pete. I signed up for one of his classes because I kept seeing this like, don't sleep on AI, better figure out how to use it. And I took one of his classes and he really kind of showed me how to use the prompts and which tools to use, then empowered me to kind of test and learn. And honestly, from there, that's what I've been doing. I don't really claim to be an expert because I'm still in your shoes, everyone's shoes here, where we're testing and learning, right? Like the rapid speed at which it evolves ever goes. But what I've noticed is it really is making a difference, especially in terms of which media I recommend for clients. It makes a difference in terms of which media are served up, right, through the metadata and the algorithms, what's serving up. And it really matters in terms of efficiency for comms. So for me, in addition to my Substack, which I use AI, I'm also using it in consulting, and it's helping me be more efficient in terms of whether I'm using Claude to do like tone and sentiment and like, what questions do you think Bloomberg TV will ask this type of client, and then being able to put together a very comprehensive briefing daughter question, or something more complicated where it's like, how should I be using, which outlet should I be using to like increase our rank in search, right? So you can, AI, the pendulum has swung from like the beginner AI on draft a press release, draft a blog, draft a briefing document, to really truly make recommendations on which media outlets, which reporters, what are the tough questions, what are the anticipated risks. And I think as you're learning AI, you have to be able to continually test and learn safely, right? You have to have a subscription. Don't just be putting it into free chat GPT. We've all learned what happens there. But the testing and learning and being able to explore and find ways to create efficiencies is ever more critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And first tip of the day, sign up to one of Pete's kind of workshops and get him
Yes,
to train you up.
highly recommend.
Olivia, what about you?
Yes, so AI is critically changing the information landscape just as a whole. So I think that this change is impacting communicators currently and will continue to impact communicators moving forward in just the way that we share out information and the way that mis and disinformation is spread and shared. So I think staying at the forefront of this as communicators and learning how this will impact our ways of sharing information and our ways of also getting ahead of information that might have more malicious intent behind it, is critical as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that mis and disinformation aspect is sometimes overlooked, like in this whole kind of conversation. Pete, finally, to you.
First of all, thanks for the plugs. I really appreciate it. Didn't have to sneak that in somehow. Yes, I big chunk of what I do is educating media and PR teams on how to use AI tools. And from my perspective, your question sort of intersects a lot of different things, but I'd sort of break it down to kind of the tactical level and the strategic level. So at the tactical level, it's how we're using the tools and how we can best really, it's not even just the tools, it's the technology, right? I think when AI first came out, there was a lot of emphasis on content creation, and there was a lot of emphasis on like what can this give me in terms of kind of output. And now I feel like the true mastery has more to do with collaborating with AI and how that will impact you as an individual and impact your organization. So it's really kind of like integrating it on those levels so that you can really move forward in a more thoughtful way. And part of that is actually, just to add to that, part of that is like knowing when not to use AI. Obviously, there was a lot of figuring that out on both sides, in media and PR. And I think we're kind of at a zone where that's a little more clear. That the human touch is now even more valuable than it was before because of all this AI spam. But on the strategic level, I'll just say sort of the obvious thing, like people are getting their information from AI engines, right? Like they're getting answers more and more as opposed to going to websites and figuring out those answers on their own. That is really changing the game on a lot of levels. Even though I know we're going to talk about it, there's a lot of thinking about generative engine optimization and getting in answers. And there are a lot of things we can say about that and how to do that. But you kind of always have to zoom out even further. It's like, well, why are you doing that? Like what are even the rewards of this anymore? Because even though it is very conceptually similar to SEO, it's really a different thing. The entire point of it's funny to see these studies come out about like, hey, guess what? AI answers tend to kill clicks. Like, duh. Like that's what they're
Mm.
designed to do. They're designed to sort of get in and out. It's good we have data around that. But that does change really a big part of how the media ecosystem works, and I'd even argue how the internet works. So that's the big sort of strategic picture, and figuring out the striations of that and the layers of that is going to be instrumental for everyone in media and PR over the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think thinking about like AI answer engines and AI engines being its own channel in that kind of go-to-market strategies is key. It can't just be lumped in with SEO as
Mm.
like kind of that one thing. It's like with the adoption of AI growing, we need to be cognizant of like what it's spitting out, kind of how you show up in there and kind of go from there. Olivia, like we've just touched upon so many different kind of tips and ways in which people are kind of using AI. You've been kind of with the IPR conducting some in-depth research on AI adoption within the PR and comms industry. And this is something that you'll be releasing over the next month or so. So this is an exclusive first look for kind of our attendees today, which is great. Can you just tell us a bit more about the research and share kind of two or three of your most significant findings?
Yeah, gladly. So, yes, as Matt mentioned, this is a major sneak peek. So, we are still looking into the data, but we're uncovering some really amazing findings that I can't wait to share with you all. So, this study that the Institute for Public Relations is conducting is being sponsored by New York Life. And what we did is we went ahead and conducted 30 interviews with senior communications leaders at national and multinational corporations, agencies, and a few universities as well. Our organizations, just to give you all an idea, ranged from small boutique firms to large conglomerates and represent a wide range of stages of AI adoption. So we wanted to look at AI transformation and the role of comms throughout a myriad of different organizations and sort of industries. So our first finding was that use cases span project life cycles ranging from research all the way to delivery and promotion of initiatives. So I know that Pete mentioned that at the beginning we were all focused on content creation as a major use case. That is still a major use case according to our research, but again, we are looking at organizations in a wide variety of sizes, and this sort of applies differently depending on the organization. So our top use cases that we found were content creation and research and analysis, and this is for the organization as a whole. Use cases for communicators specifically included media analysis, pitch generation, headline creation, news aggregation, use for help with issues management, social media analysis, prep for briefing materials. So I'm not sure what you all are currently using your AI tools for, but these are some of the things that were coming out of the research. A couple of our more advanced organizations were also using it as prep for press interviews and message testing in sort of a safe environment. So they mentioned that some of their clients are more willing to be vulnerable with media training and make mistakes if the thing on the receiving end was an AI bot versus a person. So that plays a really interesting role. And I thought that that popped out and was really interesting. So I like to pair each of our findings with a suggestion. So the suggestion paired with this finding is to develop your AI strategy. Long term, you need to identify the high impact use cases within your organization specifically, because every organization is a little bit different, and work with organizational leadership to really develop guidelines for use. So that's our number one finding. Another finding that I'll highlight is we found that with this different sort of stage of transformation, and adoption, organizations sort of clustered into three distinct AI maturity phases. So the first of these were our more tactical users. They apply AI to isolated tasks like drafting or summarization. It's usually used for basic content or research use. Like Pete mentioned, usually at the beginning of the lifestyle, it's more content generation focused, and that's what we found here. So that's absolutely true. Another group that we had are our strategic implementers. So these organizations deploy AI across multiple functions with clear workflows. And we saw that these organizations often reported use cases across four different function categories. So they're using AI for at least four different function categories. Like one function category would be content creation, another would be research analysis, another might be, media training. So that was how our strategic implementer organizations worked. And then third, we had our transformational organizations. And these are organizations where AI is being embedded into the entire enterprise across functions, and they're working on building proprietary solutions. So this is being built into the fabric and the culture of the organization as a whole. So our suggestion for this finding is no matter what the adoption phase is, right? We have organizations in every phase of this with communications. Hands-on experimentation remains the most prevalent method for upskilling employees, no matter where you are. So I can touch a little bit more on that later, but and there will be plenty of findings about upskilling once we launch the report. But no matter where you are, that was key in continuing to upskill. And then our third and final finding that I'll share is that leadership engagement stood out as the strongest predictor of AI adoption success. So, AI strategy must originate from organizational leadership, not simply the technical teams. So, in a lot of these organizations, IT and tech were sort of the primary function in charge of AI adoption, which makes sense, right? But leadership should be highly engaged in the strategy and how this looks moving forward and how it should be rolled out. And I think communicators and PR teams are uniquely positioned to sort of serve as AI translators. So, our dual role of a user of these technologies and also an enabler of the use of them throughout the organization allows us to serve as sort of the bridge between the more technical capability roles and organizational adoption, building it into that fabric um, of the organization. So my suggestion here, of course, is that leaders should openly share their use cases for new technology to champion this adoption. And they can also encourage experimentation with AI tools, allow employees safe opportunities to explore, fail, and learn how to use these tools effectively.
Yeah, that's great. I think like the finding about those different maturity stages is really interesting to me, and something that we've been working with at kind of our agency is implementing that kind of agency-wide training to really raise the floor of kind of AI maturity and AI comfort levels within the agency. And I think kind of bouncing off that third point about leadership and the importance of that, they're really like driving that forwards and helping to kind of have that top down. I think we're seeing from our clients when we talk to clients that we do see a big variance though about kind of like maturity levels. Pete, I know that you're delivering kind of workshops and you're working with lots of clients. Like, does this align with what you're seeing, and like how can people kind of raise the bar when they're kind of looking at adopting AI within their organizations?
Yeah, it very much aligns with what I'm seeing in various organizations, and from smaller sort of boutique places to larger corporate comms teams. And the third point I'd just totally underscore and like underline a bunch of times, just because like the leadership engagement really matters a lot. And not just in terms of like the interest of seeing good results from AI, but just actually using the tools. You don't necessarily have to be like the best enthusiast ever, although it would help. But really sort of understanding like what people are kind of dealing with on a ground level, and being able to design your organization and systems around it. There's a couple of things I'd love to, I think, add to. One is that everywhere I go, everyone's kind of obsessed with ROI, right? At least now they are. I think previously they were maybe a little more willing to experiment, but now we're kind of in a phase of AI that people want to see some kind of measurable return. And I think if you're struggling with that, I think it's a little easier on the tactical level, as Olivia outlined, just because you probably have a process that is AI free that you can measure, in terms of time, in terms of, what the overall output is. And then with AI put into the picture, like what is that KPI, how does that KPI change? And then as you measure those, that sort of gives you the stepping stones and the building blocks to go to a more strategic implementation. Um, Definitely as I think Olivia sort of emphasized, when you do want to sort of transition bigger groups to that level, you're going to have these internal champions that are going to be the sort of bigger architects of various workflows. And they might come from surprising places. They're probably honestly not product people, but they're very kind of product minded. That's what I find. And they can really sort of work with an organization that's really on board with the transformation. They can work with product teams to kind of like systemize certain things and really move forward. But broadly, the whole team still needs to benefit from AI. So what I feel like a true strategic implementation looks like now is less about, every person learning every tool and more about making sure they have easy access to the context of whatever they're doing. And this is kind of the next, in my view, the sort of the next sort of dimension of AI. Like we've heard a lot about prompting and getting the right outputs out of AI by speaking to it properly. Now I feel like it's all about what does it know about you and the thing you want to do, and then zoom out to the organization. And it gets a little complicated once you get into workflows, but it is like that's the most important thing. How can a person, when trying to do a specific task, really quickly get the context they need from themselves and their organization to accelerate that task? That's a bit of a product data thread needle to thread, but it's not impossible. And breaking it down from those sort of initial use cases that I mentioned that you're already measuring, it'll come naturally. But that's sort of the difference between someone who's just an organization that's just dabbling versus one that's really implementing it, that context engineering.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just having it embedded and having those AI champions, like you said, like really helping to help others adopt it within their workflows is kind of critical. Meredith, one thing that I found really interesting from what Olivia said was people are letting their guard down when they're using AI, like and feeling a little bit more free to kind of give information and maybe a bit more vulnerable and helping them kind of engage with media training or kind of media more interest, more kind of broadly. Is that what you're seeing, like when you're speaking to people as well, or like
Yeah.
what are you seeing?
Absolutely. And Olivia, I loved the trends in finding, and I can't wait for the formal report to come out. So those are some really good teasers. But one example, and I was like writing this down, that's an actual example, a live example. I'm working with a financial services company, and we're talking about the launch of a budgeting app, and we're starting to do the media strategy. And we did a session where it was like, what outlet should we be in? Well, just our layman's PR brains were like, TechCrunch for the product side, app side, IBD for the investor side, FT, we got to be in a CNBC. Should we be talking to Kramer? And we said, let's put it into AI and see what AI comes back with. This is an actual example, and this is why it's so fascinating. Came back with 5 recommendations on which outlets would be the best target for this launch. Kiplinger's was the only traditional press that came back in terms of like a top tier. The next was NerdWallet, which is an expected trade. The final 3 were fascinating. Intuit, because they have a newsroom and they have an editorial team. Experian, and Purdue University. So I'm like, wait a second. That means we have to go find someone at Intuit, Experian, Purdue, and literally reach out to them and see like who, like similar to newsroom editors that go to, in-house, like General Motors has, Eric Savitz, right? And several other folks. But I thought that was fascinating because I would have never included them on your pitch list. But what's happening, similar to how a lot of reporters are going to Substack, and you should include Substack on, your media list. actually some of the in-house newsrooms are really hitting with it as well. So it's like, how do you work with them? Where do you forge that relationship? Where is there maybe a sponsored content or a partnership or an earn type of opportunity? But that's what's actually coming up. And that goes back to, what Pete was talking about earlier too, and everything related to structure and metadata. So like the backlinks are still important, how it's ranked and authoritative are still important. But that's what's coming up. And that's what's changing the way that we're doing media, right? So like if you think about Olivia's model of the, maturation phase of like beginner, strategic, implementer or transformational, I would say most are between 1 and 2. Like there are hardly any like PR teams that really are truly transformational because we're all not at that level yet. We're all kind of at that beginner strategic implementation. So I would say test this. First of all, sign up, have an account, have your guidelines, as Olivia says, right? Like you got to be really careful you don't spill any tea, but actually go in and test what you were thinking against AI and see where it's making sense. Another way that you can test is actually to do your own media audit through AI, right? Like what actually comes up. So if you did a media audit and it comes up Incision or Muckrack or Meltwater, whatever you're using, see what actually AI pulls and you will see what is ranked more. And that's what goes back to the test and experiment in a safe space, Matt, where it's like, actually go through that exercise with your team so that your brain isn't stuck in. For me, I started PR, early 2000s, right? It's very different now. AI will actually help get you over that hump of, I don't always have to be going to a traditional outlet. I might be going to a newsroom or an academic or a Substack.
Yeah, and I think having like the way in which AI is kind of evolving our media lists is something we're seeing like all the time. You're always going to have those tier one media lists that clients are pushing towards. But I think what we're trying to do now is create kind of that AI influence list that we know are driving a lot of citations in and a lot of visibility within these AI answer engines. So it's not necessarily kind of like knocking out some of those traditional media outlets in the tier one list, but it's a supplementary piece to it. And we can start to measure against that and really like set foundations to that. One question that came in, Meredith, I think, in the chat was just about kind of like, did you kind of plug in the audience as you were kind of like doing some of those tests for those outlets?
The first time, no. The second time, yes. And similar results. We got some like random, I would say like syndicates that came up in like the second time with the audience. The issue is our audience is kind of everyone. So I would say that is a really great prompt when you have a very specific audience. Like if you were looking for a Gen Z target audience, you should include audience, like whether your prompt is like role, task, audience, deliverable, topic, pitch, like be very specific with like what you're actually trying to get out of it. But for this, our audience is so massive. So the first time we did it without the audience, but if you do have a specific audience in mind, which a lot of brands do, yes, you should plug that in and see what comes up. That's a great question.
Yeah, definitely. And Pete, obviously, we're kind of looking at now, we're thinking about AI search and the impact that that's having on kind of our industry. And it's something that, when we talk to kind of clients and when we see with PR teams and both in-house and like other agencies, this is something that I think a lot of people are grappling with. Like, how do we show up, or like how do we even measure this? We've obviously been trying to do that with our own proprietary solutions. We're lucky enough to have an AI lab building proprietary solutions like Hotwire Spark and Hotwire Radiate to kind of deliver workshops and consult with clients on this. Kind of as you're working with clients and delivering your workshops and online courses, kind of how are you consulting on having kind of greater visibility within these AI engines?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. But like I said, I kind of almost start with the zoomed out view of, what is the reward, what is the point? And I think in PR, it's actually a little easier to answer just because you're not necessarily dealing with a CPM advertising model or transactional needs. It's more of a share of voice and visibility and brand reputation, and all of that matters. a lot, and obviously AI answers can influence that. So that answers the why, but the how is obviously for starters, no one's figured this out. Like as we all know, and I'm sure your lab is in the same place. Partly because it's a new thing, partly because it's changing. You know, the AI engines are also experimenting and prioritizing things differently depending on when you query them and what model you're using. One thing we know is that there is it's a race. Like Google wins in traditional search, and if you count AI overviews, they're arguably the biggest player, but in AI search purely, it's still very much up in the air who's going to win. And I think because of that, there's a one clear takeaway is like you kind of have to optimize for multiple engines. So whether it's Perplexity, ChatGPT, AI overviews, um, broadly the technical things you should do to get there are the same or at least more or less the same. And it starts with, good hygiene on your SEO. To Meredith's point, when she talked about the tier one and AI recommending some surprising outlets, I think that's great. I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, remember, AI doesn't know what tier one is. AI is just
Mhm.
going out there and looking for
Yeah.
patterns and looking for authority and looking for credible sites. And if it sees a trade pub that might have a tiny audience, but has been covering the same subject for years and has a massive corpus, plus has a lot of citations on what it writes about throughout the web, it's like, oh, this obviously is an authority on the subject you just asked me about. So that's probably where you want to go. And, with your human in the loop checking of whether it is, you'd probably go like, oh yeah, that actually does make more sense than trying to get some reporter at the Wall Street Journal to pay attention to me and spending all my resource on that. Um, so, so that's a great rule. I think that the idea of like looping AI into this and getting recommendations on publications that you might not otherwise think about. But on the sort of many engines part of it, I think about this a lot because on the media side of things, there's, I'm sure everyone knows about the whole licensing deal versus uh, should we sue the pants off these AI engines for harvesting our content? What that has done as a consequence is that presence in AI engines isn't just an open web situation where the best answer rises. It's now the degree to this influence is a matter of some debate, and it sort of depends on the engine too. But the fact that whether someone has a deal with a publication in place or has a, shall we say, acrimonious relationship with one of those publications will factor into whether you might be seen more in ChatGPT versus Perplexity, for example. Also, keep an eye on who's blocking. So, they might not necessarily have a deal or be suing, but they might have a robots.txt file that tells everyone to go away unless they pay. So, again, all of these things factor into visibility in an AI engine. One thing that seems, and I haven't really unpacked all the facets to this, but one thing that seems clear to me is that once you're in an answer, um, it's almost like it's probably hard to unseat you, because clearly it's seen a pattern that this information is credible and it's not just looked at your one site. Again, it depends on the specificity of the query, and that's another whole layer to this on how it's totally different from keywords. These are super long queries, difficult to measure, though whether or not it's worth it to pay one of these firms, these emerging startups that purport to understand GEO, um, is another matter. Um, but the whole idea of um, the your answer, your information fueling part of the answer, um, it's kind of invalidating to some extent what you would think of as page rank, So like in the SEO world, whether you were number one or number three or number five on the SERP mattered a whole hell of a lot.
Mhm.
Um, Now, if you're kind of in the top three and you're amalgamated into an answer, might even be the top six. It kind of depends on the engine. That's probably good enough. You're in there, you're cited,
Mhm.
you're probably on one of the cards. So, there's a sort of a different ranking system now of sort of like there's in other words kind of a lower bar, but a smaller set of winners. because you don't have a page that just either infinitely scrolls or paginates. Not that anyone ever went to page two of Google, but those are kind of the loose rules. I hope there's some actionable stuff in there that people can sort of extract from that. But I think the things I pay attention to the most are like, who's in what engine, who's suing who, and then everything. I won't repeat what Meredith said, but there's sort of those surprising publications that are you might not have thought as quote unquote tier one, but are probably a better place to get your message out to the audience that you care about.
Mhm. Can I add one more thing to that, Matt? Because like Pete had
Yeah.
my brain going, and I was, writing stuff down as he was talking about it. Not in as sophisticating language. I'm a little bit more of a layman's term. So I'm like, okay, citations are important, engagement is important. One thing I would say too, and I think like there was like a very direct question of like, how do we show up in AI results very simply? Also social, like don't sleep on social. If a media publication is really good on social, I would say two of the best are probably Business Insider and Yahoo. They're just really good. Everything that goes like Yahoo Finance, everything that goes on Yahoo Finance goes on yahoo.com, goes on the social. Like it's just everywhere. Business Insider is really good about that too. And Business Insider just launched a follow on their reporters so that you can follow the reporters. And that makes a really big difference too, because that goes back to citation, that goes back to whatever. So to answer, the question in like very simple terms too, getting inclusion, whether it's in a newsletter, in a roundup, I'm huge on that, right? Or a Substack, which is opted in, or getting the reporter and or verified media brand to post it on social. That's actually going to also help with the cachet, because if we're talking about like number of platforms to Pete's point, or number of citations, like where that's pulled up, I think that's important. And it also made me think, because Pete talked about like it used to be kind of backlinks and bylines. There's still kind of the importance there. I agree with you on the SEO piece, but makes me wonder too, brands that are having trouble with like an evolution or a brand identity, right? Like with Pinterest, we were going from like visual discovery platform or visual search or image shit, whatever it was years ago, to shopping platform. We started talking about, should we update our Wikipedia page, right? Like, because that has so many citations, was that always getting pulled up? So kind of a question back to the group too, right? I know we're supposed to have the answer, but that's something I'm exploring, right? Like, where do we get bylines? Where do we get backlinks? Where do we look at an Intuit or a GM Newsroom or a Purdue? Where should we be looking at where we have citations, and what is being said about your brand there? So if you're needing to transform your brand narrative, you might look at some of those, older trusted wiki type, and then use new media to help kind of surround sound that.
Yeah, totally agree. On the point of like the social and sort of expert sites, certainly sites like Reddit and Quora are sort of
Yes.
newly
Good
relevant,
call.
and Wikipedia that's a great point. In fact, I was at a recent conference, and someone who specializes or had specialized in, if you have a problem on your Wikipedia page, we can do something about it, or
Mm-hmm.
so and there's similar folks that specialize in Reddit, right? Because Reddit, if you're not authentic, you're dead. And so the the firms that have ins on those places that have methods to figure out how to either seed data or correct data on any of these places, they're newly busy. That is a good
Mm,
business to have been in, and if you know, because these are very relevant sites to engines. And I definitely see LinkedIn in particular linked often in a couple of them, Perplexity
okay.
notably. But it's like some of these social, like if they're creating LinkedIn newsletter post essentially as credible as an article on BI or TechCrunch, I mean, it matters what you're doing over there. So for sure.
Yeah, and I
Great.
think you touched on something, Pete, about the some models prefer some sites more than others. So it's not just about going to ChatGPT and saying, I'm only going to look at this. I think you've got to get a sense from a few different models to understand kind of what's being preferred across those models. And it can't just be like a single source that you're going to. So I think,
Yeah. And you can't just go by users because ChatGPT has 800 million users, but it only
Mhm.
introduced search explicitly like last fall. Like it's been about little less than a year, I think. Whereas
mm,
Perplexity is a search engine, right? So even though
mm,
it's not as big, the use cases are very different between those two those two places, and where you're getting information retrieval in sort of a real-time sense, I'm sure it sort of splits up quite a bit differently. But it becomes this thing of like, what's search anymore? Like, and what's cite, like, you whether or not something even gets citations within an answer. And I've even started to notice this on Perplexity, which is usually pretty good with always citing something.
Mhm.
It really strongly depends on, the query. So yeah, I don't really have a takeaway on that one, but it is a thing of like the use cases and how people are using these engines can vary quite a bit between the various major players. Like I would imagine Grok probably looks very different from a lot of the other ones in terms of what they're doing. Though again, if you're getting your message out on Twitter and that's the audience that's important to you, then that matters a lot.
Yeah,
Shouldn't
absolutely.
call it Twitter, I
Con
guess. I'm old school.
Conscious of time, because I mean, we could probably keep going on this conversation for hours because we're having such a great discussion. I think one of the questions that came in is, um, and Pete, you were mentioning different AI tools there. Kind of what are your preferences on which AI tools you use? Like, I'm sure, kind of Meredith, like you've got a go-to tool that you're using for media lists. Like
Mhm.
Pete, you've got kind of different tools as you look to perform different tasks. Like probably question for each one of you, like what's your go-to for a different task that you're working on?
Well, I can lead off, I guess.
Mm,
I would say if there's a tool that if you have not used deep research on any of the main AIs, you're missing out. I feel that that is a very underutilized tool, at least in most of the organizations that I do business with, and it's kind of revelatory the first time you use it, particularly for something that's very relevant to your work. And For PR firms in particular, I think there's some very important sort of research-backed whether it's an output, I don't mean it as an output like something public facing, but something that's critical to your workflow. Don't It doesn't always have to be a research report, is the point, right? Like, I mean, it can really return whatever you want. It could be a table of relevant data to whatever project you're working on, which I find is a very good output when you use deep research. But they tend to be very thorough. They tend to be, quite good. And if you're experienced in whatever you're researching, your human check is usually pretty quick. So you're going to save what probably would have taken you all day, if not, most of
Mhm.
the day, and you could get it done in probably less than an hour. And
yeah,
and I would say
absolutely.
just to rank them, Perplexity is the fastest, ChatGPT is the most thorough, and um, Gemini probably has the best searchability, which isn't surprising. But one of the nice things I like about Gemini is that you can actually edit the essentially the prompt, the plan it will do. So like, they'll ask you clarifying questions to make sure the work it does is good. But with Google, you can actually see it's like, oh, like I can actually go in and edit this. So that's very handy if you're very left brain like me.
I think I'll try to break it up into like different types of comms within a comms team. So like whether internal comms, very like Fireflies or Otter AI. I actually love Otter AI and I use it for my on-site interviews when I go to a conference. I will actually use Otter AI for my media interviews because it will then not only record, but then it transcribes and it's easier for me to kind of quickly write and get a story out. In terms of drafting and content, I would agree ChatGPT is my favorite. I definitely over index ChatGPT. I do like Claude for the like tonality, and I think they're kind of good with like the almost brainstorming for some of the media stuff. I do not use AI to create pitches, and I think that's because not that I'm a journalist now, but like truly, like you see so many journalists saying like I can spot an AI pitch. I remember talking to I think it was Zoya Hassan at Forbes, and she was like, if the pitch is from AI, I will like not cover it. I can completely tell. So I will go to AI to give me ideas, like write up a newsroom or write up a release or write up something. But I really don't use that. I use it maybe as a starting point, but I think I've scared myself into like I've always been authentic and I want to have that. So use it as a prompt, use it as help. But if you're just lifting it, don't do that. There's Profit and, Muckrack and Crowley and a few others for like the media outreach and pitching. I just don't prefer it. And I think that people need to be careful. I did just get my first high XX pitch and I was like, oh, right. And I wrote back to the PR person like, hey, it's clear that this was like automated, one, and two, mass blasted, right? Like, of course, I was very friendly. I was just like, hey, I've done this before. Always make sure that you write the name, change the color, change the font. I remember having OCD, making sure it wasn't high, Pete in small letters that's like blue, and then the rest of the text. But I think it's important that again, and Olivia made this point, what's the guidelines, and to the point of the maturation, what are you using it for? Like if you're that strategic thinker and you've got the 4 different pillars that you're using it for, what are you using it for? Is it Perplexity, Chat GPT, Otter AI, and name that other? And then how are you establishing guidelines for internal comms using Otter AI, for media relations using PressPal, for content and writing using Chat GPT, right? Because if you are actually writing a newsroom post or a blog or a byline and you try to place this, you don't want that to be kind of searchable. So you need to have the guardrails around it.
Yeah, definitely. That human in the loop element is so key.
Yes.
Just don't lift from directly from AI and use it. So, Olivia, like, what about you? Kind of where do you go? Where's your go-to?
Yeah, I mean, of course, deep research. Being a researcher, we use it for a ton of different use cases just across our organization. I do use Perplexity quite a bit. Perplexity tends to be more reliable, we've found, than other AI tools when it comes to research citations and linking back. When we started using ChatGPT for research citations, it would give us phantom citations. So, word to the wise, if you are using that for research, it might be better now than when I was using it because, it continues learning. But be really careful, and that human in the loop is critical. We say think of AI as your intern. You would never blast off something that it gives you without checking it over, right? So, especially when it comes to research credibility, if you're using it for information, make sure some human is checking which sources it's citing because they might be completely hallucinated. So, Perplexity, deep research. ChatGPT for some wordsmithing stuff, and Claude definitely for wordsmithing. There are a couple other statistical ones that we've been experimenting with for data analysis, which is really cool because SPSS is kind of clunky sometimes. So we're excited that there might be something that could help with some of, the statistical analysis on the research side. But as far as comms goes, that's what we look at.
Yeah, great. And I know we're actually over time, but we've still got a full room, which is amazing. So I just want to finish on one final question because you've kind of given so many tips throughout the discussion, which has been amazing. Kind of for those teams who are maybe still stuck at that initial stage of AI maturity, like if we look at that adoption curve that we were talking about earlier, kind of what are your kind of 2, 3 quick tips on how they would get started and kind of get going with AI? Pete, I think naturally I'll start with you for that.
Right. Yeah. So I mentioned sort of the ROI thing earlier, although that might not be exactly the phase you're thinking about. But um, I think one of the things that holds a lot of companies back from truly implemented AI is being really worried about the data component of it and data privacy, and that is a concern, no question. That is like one of the key things you need to educate your people about. And obviously, your IT team needs to lock down certain capabilities. When ChatGPT, for example, a number of months ago now, it had introduced connections, and you could sort of go to that drop down and say, "Yeah, I'll hook up my Gmail and my Google Drive," and it's you can imagine a bunch of people at various companies were thinking about doing that, and you kind of need to make sure that that doesn't happen, obviously. But once you have sorted that out, that's very sort outable. This is the thing. You can like once you have a data policy and you choose an enterprise tool, I think, I wouldn't say it goes away, but it largely for day to day, it should go away in that your people should be empowered to do what they need to do and can do with the data that's relevant to their job. Like that's the thing you really need to be able to do because it's once they can do that and they can start designing their own workflows, essentially, whether they're content creation or collaboration or something else, that's where you're going to start to see the true unlocks. And like I said, once you have some promising things there, and you think you can design a workflow that can spread to the whole organization, start measuring and just use those as building blocks. And before you know it, you're going to be strategically applying this all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. Olivia, what about you? What are your kind of two, three key tips?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sort of in line with what I shared earlier with our findings, start with your leaders championing this change. You can also find peer-to-peer champions who are using this technology and can share with their peers how they're using it. Examples and use cases stood out as really strong tools for adoption. Come up with a specific framework for what this transformation will look like with leadership involvement and buy-in, and encourage employees to experiment. Some organizations are gamifying this. Sometimes they're doing AI hackathons where they're coming up with 100 plus prompts for, here's what you can use for this and that and the other. So kind of have fun with it, make sure your leaders are involved, and go from there.
Yeah, definitely agree with the hackathon. We've done that at our last two kind of company financial year kickoffs, and it's gone down like so well, and people just have fun with it. Meredith, last but certainly not least.
Okay, final word. I would say identify what are your biggest pain points or weakness within your team, right? Like, are you lagging on the writing? Are you needing help with the media? Is the deep research something that you're just not there with? Is it the internal chatter? And kind of map which AI tools. So everyone now has shared great AI tools. So if a pain point or weakness is writing, maybe you're using ChatGPT. If a pain point or weakness is deep research, maybe you're using perplexity, right? So just kind of identify your own team's weakness or pain point and see where AI might have a tool or solve, and then start kind of testing and learning. And then another thing I would say, and this is just kind of actionable, and I'm actually doing this with a lot of clients, is like test and learn with media, right? Like my biggest pet peeve is when a client's like, this person was in Fast Company, why aren't we? And you're like, because it's a completely different story and right? Like I won't even get into that, but it's like my biggest pet peeve. Just because a competitor or a like-minded person is in an outlet doesn't mean you should be, but that will at least give you an indication of where their brain's at. So what you might do, or what I might do, is I might actually do an audit of their competitor, but instead of just doing a Google audit, I'm now doing an AI audit to say, actually, and I love Fast Company, so I'm not talking bad, but Fast Company might not even come up in the ranking. It might be that, PC Mag or Upstarts Media with Alex Conrad or Sources with Alex Heath, two great tech outlets, might actually be higher ranked and more impactful than that Fast Company. So you might say, hey, I know someone at Fast Company, we can reach out, we can try to get you in Fast Company if it makes sense. But actually what we should really be thinking of is these like direct to inbox Substacks like Upstarts or Sources. So for me, I would use AI as kind of a crutch to be able to answer those tough client questions of when they're saying, we want to be in the Wall Street Journal, we want to be here. Actually, what's going to make more of an impact and what's going to make your competitor say, hey, they're in this, we want to be in that. Don't always follow the path, blaze your own.
Yeah, I love it. What a way to end. Um, yeah, so I mean, we went long, but people are still with us, which is awesome. And I think we could have probably kept on going for another hour or so.
Probably.
But there's so many kind of great tips shared, and Olivia, looking forward to your research coming out soon. Going to be grabbing that as soon as it launches. Definitely sign up to Meredith and the media, and follow Pete on the media co-pilot and get him involved in kind of any training for your team as well. Like Meredith said, it's a great
Highly
place.
recommend Pete.
Yeah, definitely recommend. And obviously Hotwire are delivering kind of workshops and audits for businesses as well. So thank you so much for the three of you for kind of your time today. Like I said, could have gone a lot longer, shared some great insights, but thanks everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Chat.
Thanks,
Hotwire
team.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.